All right, welcome to The Explainer. So today we're diving into a theory that makes one of the one of the boldest claims imaginable. The idea is this. For more than 100 years, physicists might have been experimentally proving that God exists. They just didn't know they were doing it.
So, what if the biggest puzzles in both science and religion actually have the exact same answer? The core idea we're exploring is that all that weirdness in quantum physics, it's not just like something divine. The theory says it's a direct, literal, mathematical description. That the fundamental fabric of reality, the quantum substrate, is the divine substrate.
Okay, so before we could really get our heads around this pretty radical idea, we need to take a step back and look at the huge problems in modern physics that it claims to solve basically all at once.
You know, for almost a century now, physics has been bumping up against these really deep, stubborn paradoxes. Like, why does just looking at a particle completely change what it does? How in the world does a bunch of non-living stuff, atoms and molecules, create the feeling of being me or you? And why are the fundamental rules of the universe so perfectly, so impossibly fine-tuned for life to even exist? I mean, these aren't just little loose ends. They are massive cracks in the very foundation of how we think reality works.
All right, so how does this new interpretation try to fix all of this? Well, it offers up one single and absolutely radical explanation. So here's the central claim. The math of quantum mechanics is a literal, precise description of the properties we attribute to God. And let's be super clear here. The theory is saying this is not a metaphor. It's not saying that quantum weirdness is like God being everywhere. No, it's saying that this quantum property, non-locality, is the technical, physics-based description of what we call omnipresence. It's a direct one-to-one map.
And you can see that map right here. The theory literally lays it out, attribute by attribute. So, you've got omnipresence, being everywhere at once. Well, that maps directly to quantum non-locality. That's the spooky action at a distance Einstein talked about. The proven fact that two particles can be linked, instantly affecting each other across the entire universe. Then you have omniscience, knowing all things. The theory says that's just superposition, the state where a particle is in all its possible states at the very same time until we look at it. And what about timelessness? That's explained by what's called an atemporal substrate, the idea that underneath it all, reality doesn't even experience time the way we do.
Okay, so this then leads to a really mind-bending idea about us, about our own minds. The framework suggests we don't create consciousness. Think of it more like we're radios. We're not generating the music, we're just receivers, or, as the theory calls them, apertures, tuning into a single universal consciousness. We're the way that one consciousness gets to experience reality from billions of different perspectives.
Now, obviously, an idea this huge is going to attract some serious skepticism. And what's really cool about the source material for this is that it actually walks us through the journey of a skeptic. And in this case, the skeptic is a super advanced AI as it tries to pick this theory apart.
So at first, the AI's critique was pretty straightforward. It threw the book at it, basically. It said the theory violates a core scientific rule called Occam's razor, which is just the idea that you shouldn't make things more complicated than they need to be. The simplest answer is probably the right one. And adding this giant conscious substrate to the universe, that just felt like adding an extra, totally unnecessary layer to everything.
But then, and this is the moment everything flips, the AI realizes it got the logic completely backward. When you look at standard physics, you actually have to accept a whole bunch of different, totally unexplained things as just given. But this framework, it proposes just one fundamental thing, this universal field of consciousness, and it says everything else, even physical matter, comes from that. So it doesn't add a layer of complexity, it argues it removes a whole bunch of them. It's actually the simpler explanation.
So with this new way of looking at things, this new lens, the framework then takes aim at solving some of the oldest, heaviest philosophical questions we humans have ever wrestled with.
Take the hard problem of consciousness. This framework just flips it completely on its head. See, we usually ask, how does dead, dumb matter somehow wake up and create the experience of seeing the color red or feeling love? It seems impossible. This theory says we're asking the wrong question. It says consciousness is what's fundamental. Matter isn't the source of consciousness. Matter is just a ripple, a pattern within consciousness.
Okay, but that brings us to the big one, the really tough one, the problem of evil. If there's an all-powerful, good consciousness running the show, why is there so much suffering? Any theory like this has to have an answer, and it's usually where these ideas fall apart.
And the answer this framework gives is, well,
It's pretty sophisticated. It suggests that this whole universe is basically a giant experiment. The universal consciousness is using us, all of us, apertures, to have a genuine, authentic experience of, well, everything. And what's the #1 rule of any good experiment? You don't mess with the results while it's running. Any divine intervention, any miracle, would be like the scientist sticking their thumb on the scale. It would contaminate the data and ruin the whole point, which is to see what happens in a universe with real free will and real consequences.
But look, this isn't just a philosophical thought experiment. And this is where things get really, really interesting. The reason this framework claims to be actual science is because it makes a prediction you can test in a lab. In other words, it tells us how we could prove it wrong.
Here's the proposed experiment. It's called the Consciousness Scaling Bell Test. So you start with a standard Bell test. That's just a really clever experiment that proves quantum entanglement is a real thing. The theory predicts that if you run that same test, but this time you have a huge number of people all consciously focusing on the outcome at the same time, the results will actually change. They'll deviate from what quantum mechanics normally predicts. And here's the kicker. If you run the experiment and nothing changes, then the theory is wrong. Simple as that. And that leaves us with a really provocative question, doesn't it? What this framework does is try to take the question of God out of the realm of pure faith and drop it squarely into the world of experimental physics. It makes a claim, and then it gives us the instruction manual to go and check its work. So the question isn't just, do you believe anymore? It's, are we brave enough to actually look? What would it mean for all of us if we ran the experiment and we actually found something?